start with Eugene.
Yeah. So I moved to the Bay Area in 2014. I started covering enterprise software before Amazon. So that's something that's not in my bio, I guess. I started covering Amazon in 2016. So it's been about 5-6 years. And what was the other question?
Eugene, you can't get away that easily. You got to give us something personal.
I have 2 kids, and
Two
got
boys.
a dog.
You got 2 boys?
A boy and a daughter, and got a dog pretty recently. So it's a pandemic dog.
Pandemic dog.
Yeah, I'm loving every moment.
And so the other part of the question was, what type of stories do you cover?
I'm pretty heads down on Amazon. So 99% of my time, it's on Amazon stories. Everything, across retail, cloud, healthcare, Alexa. So it helps that I covered enterprise software before, because AWS is such a big part of Amazon now. And yeah, so Amazon itself just keeps me very busy.
Absolutely. Lauren, how about you?
Something not in my bio. Well, it says San Francisco in my bio, but I just moved to San Francisco for the very first time about 3 months ago. So I'd been living in Silicon Valley for several years. So I was always in the Bay Area, but I had never lived in San Francisco proper. So I did the opposite of what a lot of people are doing. A lot of people are moving out. I moved in, and I'm really enjoying it. I have a cat named Nougat who sleeps next to me right now, and maybe he'll make an appearance at some point. And I guess the joke that's maybe not a joke on the internet is that Nougat was the inspiration for the Android Nougat operating system, because that was the year that Google sort of opened it up to suggestions, and they were on the letter N, and it had to be a suite. And so I started this unofficial internet campaign to say well, it's got to be Nougat because that's the name of my cat. And then they, because it's all about my cat, obviously. And then they never released the official results, but one day we're just it's Nougat. And then they buried a little Easter egg of a cat in the operating system. So I was that's all the proof I need. My cat was the inspiration. So
it's a crazy coincidence.
Yeah. I think I wrote a facetious blog post about it for The Verge. And then in terms of my beat, a very different approach from Eugene, whose work I really respect. Eugene, it's great to be on the panel with you. In that, we, at Wired, we have great staff, but in some cases, some newsrooms are much bigger than ours. You look at some of the bigger papers or digital first publications, and they have these massive newsrooms and reporters who are very dedicated to their beats. And we have more of a horizontal approach to coverage, right? So I'm the consumer tech reporter. I'm the senior gear writer. So that could mean one day I'm writing about Snap, and the next day I'm writing about Apple, and the next day I'm writing about Google, and the next day it's Facebook or Meta. And so I cover a little bit of everything, but it's almost always from the consumer perspective, whether that means it's a review, it's about consumer experience, it's consumer trends, it's privacy issues, or it's something else that's emerging that's ultimately has implications for the user versus a merger or something like that, which of course also has implications for consumers, but I'm not covering acquisition news and things like that, or funding news that often and stuff like that.
And Lauren, you have, for PR people, you have a famous landlord and you have a famous neighbor. Are you willing to share?
I do actually. Yeah. So this is under embargo. I'm just kidding. So I'm actually renting from Kara Swisher, and then my next door neighbor is Casey Newton. So he lives on the property in this other house, and I live here in this house. And so it's kind of funny because Kara's not here very often. She lives in DC now, but Casey and I see each other quite a bit. We share laundry facilities, and but like we're often like very, very heads down on what we're both doing, and like are very good at keeping our embargoes. So we don't like compare notes that often. But if you don't subscribe to his newsletter, subscribe to his newsletter. It's great. That's
Thank you very much.
Neighbor. Yeah.
Thanks, Lauren. And Diane, how about you tell us a little bit about you?
I grew up in Scotland, so I spoke like this for a long time. I can put it on for the rest of the conference, which is a good accent to lose, from Canada. I used to sing in a ska band, and I lived in Hong Kong and Africa. That's not in my bio. And in terms of what I cover, I mean, I do a newsletter, but I run the team. And so I think probably what would be more useful for this group is to know where we're expanding, because I'm hiring dozens of people, which is great. And it's areas like climate leadership is intriguing to me. Just brought on Jenna McGregor from the Washington Post to build out our leadership coverage, future workforce, future of work. So I'm very interested in looking at the world through the prism of leadership and how companies are navigating a very disruptive environment. And that's across a very wide spectrum. So, and I'll get back to writing as well, but a lot of what I do is interviewing, putting together events. And so we're going to also do more multi-platform coverage, and we're going public next year. So there you go. There's a lot happening.
That's amazing. Kristen Nicole.
Hello, what's up? Something that's not in my bio. I was a Suzuki kid, cello, peaked in high school. Let's see. I went to University of Michigan and didn't step foot in the big house till graduation day. Nobody knows that. I can't tell that to people. And let's see. I had 2 kids, 2 dogs, and the beats that we cover, similar to Diane, I do a lot of management for the team, and but what the publication covers and what I'm primarily directly managing for is, it seems like the complete opposite of Lauren, honestly. All the funding and the earnings reports, and it seems like we cover every single cybersecurity breach known to man. All that good stuff, but also a lot of event stuff. So we have the main news platform at SiliconANGLE, and then we also have our broadcast branch, the Q. And we miss going to conferences. So this year has been interesting, getting into hybrid events. Right now we're live streaming from reInvent, and it's also hybrid. So there were several segments that were recorded before we flew our team out to Vegas, and those remotely recorded segments are being interwoven into the live broadcast stream, and it's been a logistics nightmare, but our production crew handled it very well. So it's been an interesting evolution for the future of work. Yeah.
Thank you. And so while I've got you, Kristen Nicole, PR people, they want to know how to work with reporters, the best way, especially in this remote working environment. Should we be emailing you? Should we be calling you? Feel free to share any pet peeves.
Oh gosh, I feel like anything that works, and this is something that is a challenge even for, teams internally, right? It's how do you get the person that you need? And especially for a company like ours, where half of our people are on set somewhere, but you need to talk to somebody. And gosh, phone calls can work. I think part of the challenge is technology, at least for me personally. And Caroline, you know very well, even when my spam blocker, blocked your call yesterday, but I saw that I had a missed call, and I'm like, that's a 415 number. I'm supposed to, I knew that you were calling. And so I was looking out for it. Otherwise, I would have completely missed that call. And for my email, I've been experimenting with prioritization settings, and it's not going well. I'm spending way too much time trying to train the software and let them know what is a priority, what's not a priority. That dog email newsletter I get in my work email that seems to still stay at the top of my inbox when other important messages are not getting through. I'm sure it's a very difficult challenge. I'd say persistence is probably more important than the channel, but that's just me.
And I think, thank you, Eugene, Amazon PR people are beast unto themselves. Can you tell us about them?
Well, they've become a lot softer lately, at least based on my personal experience. When I first started out, they were much more aggressive and just antagonistic. And, sometimes they would threaten to exclude me from certain events and for reaching out to their employees, and that kind of stopped. And I think a lot of this change has been driven by Jay Carney, their top PR person. He's been trying to be more proactive, building a relationship with reporters. And that's been really helpful because, it just leads to a better story and more accurate story. That means sometimes Carney would call me on a weekend, to correct me or, to complain about certain stuff. But at the same time, it doesn't mean we're going to go out, play golf together. It's, there's a certain line. And, but yeah, I mean, it's been a pretty positive development lately. I'm enjoying it.
And you were saying to me on a call that you had some tips for people not pitching for Amazon as to how they can sort of get your attention. Would you mind sharing that?
So you mean like non-Amazon PR people?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So since my position is, almost 100% Amazon stories, the chances of me writing a story about your client, it's very low, right? Because it's all Amazon stories. So if you're going to pitch something, it should be, like something very related to Amazon. It could be an interesting data point or, Amazon partners, it works very well. Anything Amazon related is good, like an anecdote or industry trends in e-commerce or an industry that Amazon is in. Just off the top of my head, I could think of a couple of stories I did recently that came through PR pitches, and they were about average price points of products sold on Amazon and versus other retailers. That was pretty interesting, I thought. And also the other one was a survey about these investors who buy a bunch of Amazon sellers it's like Amazon aggregators, and it was about a survey of how much they're willing to pay for each seller. So those stories did pretty well. So if you have anything interesting, feel free to reach out. I'm pretty good with email. I try to read every single email, but don't pitch through like Twitter DMs or I don't know, like Facebook or whatever. It's just it doesn't work.
Lauren, Diane?
In terms of pitching?
To share, yep.
I mean, I guess one thing I'd say is I have a lot of respect for PR people. When I was at the Journal, I used to write a lot of A-heads. I do several a year, and my best ideas always came from PR people. And it was usually not about their company. It was about something like, I'm trying to think of an example, like, Japan Airlines had altered the number of seats on their flights between Sydney and Tokyo because the Australians drank so much beer, they had to put in more toilets. Like, that's a great story, right? And who knew about the politics of toilets on planes? And so I think that one of my books was inspired by actually two books inspired by a PR person. So I guess I would embrace my inner storyteller and step outside your swim lane sometimes, which I know is a term Forbes likes, to tell us what we should be covering that's not specific to your client, because you are great storytellers. That's what your job is. And you have a difficult job of trying to come up with great stories for people who may not naturally always be in the news. And so I think that's a skill set that should be put to use as often as possible, not just for your clients. So if that helps.
Lauren, I'm opening the floor to you.
Okay. So yeah, I would say because I cover such a wide range of companies, it's probably a little bit more of a challenge for folks on the PR side to figure out what it is exactly I'm covering. And sometimes sometimes I like this because it means the weirdest things can come into my inbox and they're super interesting. And I'm like, oh, I could actually write about that. There's nothing stopping me from seeing if there's a story here and writing about it. But on the downside, just 2 weeks ago, I wrote a story about NFTs and I was like, this is going to murder my inbox. And it totally did, because now I'm just getting tons of NFT pitches. And I'm like, I'm not the NFT reporter. So I think there are, I would say just understanding what a story is or who a good source is really useful. I get a lot of pitches from people who say, do you want to talk to this sort of low-level unknown executive who's working at this company that's sort of peripheral to the companies you cover? And that is very rarely useful to me. But if it's someone's let's just say, in Eugene's case, if it was just to borrow from Eugene's beat, this person just left Amazon and is starting X, and they think it's a really interesting company in the consumer space. I'm already more inclined to talk to them because they sort of have this maybe a big tech company attached to them, or experience that's really interesting. And so they might be their new product might be worth checking out from a consumer perspective. So yeah, understanding what a good story is and who a good source would actually be is really useful. And then I would also say this time of year is just generally a very bad time to pitch. And I see this thing happening right now where I think a lot of folks on the comm side are trying to get in their last minute pitches, or they have clients who they're trying to sort of tie up loose ends with right now. And in every pitch that's come through my inbox for the past week and a half or so, I'd say I have absolutely no bandwidth to address this before the end of the year. I just don't. I am working on stories right now that I have to get done by the end of the year. Some of them are enterprise reporting, and there's no way I'm just going to suddenly have this squirrel moment and look to the other way, and pick up another story. So I think understanding timing is really important too.
Thank you. So as you can predict, lots of questions are coming our way. So before we address those, which we will need a bit of time, so really let's just ask this one last question to our panelists, which is tied into today's theme. What are your predictions for 2022? How about we start with you, Kristen Nicole?
Oh, wow. So, gosh, we're looking into super clouds. That's kind of the emerging thing. I'm wondering if it's going to be a buzzword. I feel like it's kind of an evolution of all the things that have already been happening. And Eugene, you probably know better than anybody the extreme influence that Amazon has with AWS, and just kind of following what's happening in that market, whether or not they're going to be disrupted in the next year. There's been so many leadership changes across the sector and also a lot of decoupling, right? Boomi has gone from Dell, VMware has gone from Dell, and Teresa Carlson, no longer AWS. She's at Splunk now. So a lot of changes at the top. I'm very interested to see where all of that is going to lead. Whether or not Microsoft is going to disrupt Amazon more or less than expected next year, and how many headlines my freelancers will try to sneak in super cloud. I'm
going to leave it open. Anyone can talk here. And when I say anyone, I'm keeping it to the media panelists for now.
I mean, I'm genetically an optimist. But I will say, so what on the plus side, I'm very excited by the innovation and the digital transformation of work, and also what we're seeing in biotech and The future of health, I think, is very exciting. Climate leadership, I do think, is a big topic. I guess what concerns me is less immediate issues like the supply chain or even the pandemic, and more as I step back and look at what's happening with, the combination of inflation and this continued polarization in the US and what's happening in China. I suppose even though it's not a topic for this setting, I think the kind of macroeconomic environment actually concerns me a bit in terms of people's opportunities to find opportunities coming out of this pandemic to make a great living, start great companies and innovate. So that's something that we'll be watching and keeping our eyes on, I guess. So.
Everything.
I would say, I think what we're starting to see happen this year, we have started to see happen, is that this trend has emerged where a lot of the technologies that have been emerging for the past several years are now being sort of codified or given names. And so it's easy to dismiss them as buzzwords. And like, I even try to resist using them. But when I think about things like the metaverse, right, or like Web3 and blockchain, those are all like fundamentally really important technologies that Wired covers. We just like maybe don't hop like right aboard the train of calling them that, right? So like, I pay a lot of attention to AR and VR and XR, and like for a while it was being called XR, and now it's the metaverse, so like I'm still going to continue to track that. Or like now it's being called Web3, but this idea of like a more decentralized web or applications that aren't controlled just by like the same handful of companies, and how the blockchain could fundamentally like provide some underlying technology for that. That's something we're going to be tracking, as well as to Diane's point, climate change, climate solutions in particular. That's definitely a big thing for us. And also one thing that might be of note to the group here is that we recently just finished the integration between our Wired UK team and our Wired US team. So now we're going to have a little bit more breadth of coverage over in Europe as well. And so I think we'll be paying a little bit more attention to regulatory affairs as they are happening in Europe and also here in the US.
Eugene, I think that leaves you.
Yeah. I think a couple of things. First, just the continued rise of crypto. Just today, Square changed its name to Block, all things. And Jack Dorsey, getting more into the weeds. I think it's very interesting development. And just based on our readership, crypto stories are just, way ahead of other stories. The readership demand is huge. So I think that's something we'll continue to see. And the other topic is at a more personal level, but I'm very interested in retail tech. So Amazon Go and, cashless technology. These things are I feel like it's really taking off, and, Amazon competitors are jumping in. A lot of startups are getting in there. So and also, especially because of COVID, the need for contactless shopping is just growing. So
retail theft. I mean, if you walk out of a store and the chip already registers the sale, then they don't care if you swarm them, right? So I think that's another factor.
Yeah. All kinds of issues will pop up going forward. So it's a story I'm very closely following.
So we've got quite a few questions from the group. One that I will selfishly ask, because I know that we're often recommending surveys to our clients to get some media traction. The question was, what do you think of surveys?
I personally like surveys. I like to partner. I'm partnering with a group right now that I like the data that they have so that we can have it exclusively. What I like about it, if it's the right group and it feels like it's got some heft, is that we're bringing intelligence to our audience that we can't recreate ourselves. I'm less interested in surveys, obviously, that come out through a generic press release. We may use it in context for a story, but we're less likely to give it some breathing room and space to explore.
Yeah, I would say I'm sorry, go Kristen, Nicole.
I was just going to say, I think that's an important distinction. You know, the surveys that we talked to 8 CIOs versus, you know, having some legit, very good data. Aside from citations, it's, you know, we have an in-house research department, and having that information when we're covering events and we're talking to the C-suite folks from so many Fortune 100 companies, the very first thing I ask my writers to look for is what stats are they sharing? What data are they sharing? And what are they saying that other people haven't talked about yet? So I just wanted to piggyback off of what Diane was saying.
I would say increasingly, I am not writing stories based on like a pitch of a survey. Like someone might say it's embargoed until next Tuesday or something like that. And I say, great. And in my mind, I'm already thinking, I'm not going to file a story about this one survey or this like one research report for Tuesday, but I might just kind of put it in my, you know, theoretical back pocket for the future. It also depends. I'm definitely like the brand of the research firm that is putting out the data. If it's a firm I've just never heard of before, and to Kristen Nicole's point, if like the sample is really small, I'm very unlikely to pay attention to it. But sometimes even like a firm I've never heard of will still get me thinking on something. For example, it might have been early this morning. So sometimes all the early mornings blend together. I think it was this morning I received one from the UK. It was about wearables, and this firm did this interesting thing where they compared their predictions for like 5 years and what they thought the wearables market was going to do, and they compared it to like what actually happened, which I thought was kind of clever. And one of the things they noted was that where a lot of their projections were on track, they had predicted that the average selling price would eventually go down and that margins would shrink on wearables, and due to Apple's influence on that segment of the market, that had actually not happened, right? Because Apple can still command somewhere between $300 and $500 for a watch. And I was like, that's like such an interesting little nugget to pay attention to. Like, I'm going to keep that in mind as I cover wearables in the future. So like, they're not valueless. It's just like, I'm unlikely to write a single one-off story based on like a report.
Yeah, for me, I think it's also case by case. You know, in most cases, I think survey results are used as a, you know, kind of small nugget for a bigger feature story. But occasionally I would do a standalone story, just a quick post based on the survey results. Like I said earlier, there was a survey that asked Amazon, you know, buyers of Amazon sellers to share the price point they would offer to these sellers, and that was, you know, it was really interesting. It was timely survey, and it did really well, you know, readership wise too. So depends.
I think, you know, again, we've got a PR audience. Just sort of circling back to the question at the top about how do you work with PR people and how can we work better with you? One thing that we always, as you would know, we always like to ping you and say, can we sit down with you over a coffee or take you for a drink? Or, you know, these days it's a Zoom meet and greet. So I think, you know, one question is, how are you feeling about those in-person opportunities? And if we're doing in-person or Zoom, is there sort of a bar that you set? Like, does it have to be hard news? If we just want to get to know you a little bit, is there any time to do that?
I think it's hard to get to know you. I am keeping muted. I'm trying to think of, it's so contextual. Of course, when somebody's a big name, I always say yes, just because we're interested in what they have to say. You know, we know that our audience cares about it. I noticed that Jillian and some other people in the chat talked about the level somebody's at. I think I find myself gravitating toward either very human stories, or in all honesty, I think if somebody has some sort of thought leadership, if they're on the cutting edge of a wave of change that we care about, and it's they're actually doing interesting things, then we want to hear from them. I know that sounds very generic. It's almost like crowdsourcing what's the hot color in socks next spring? Like, I don't know, you tell me, right? It's hard to order these things up. You know it when you see it. And I guess I'd let others weigh in. I do a lot of meet and greets, in part because I think that that's how I get my best ideas, and how we should all get our best ideas from other people, or else we're not doing our jobs. At the same time, I think that the stakes for leaders are higher, and they have to show more thought leadership, more high impact leadership. I know there's a question about inclusion. I actually think we have to hold people to task for that. So if there's somebody that's moving the needle in those areas, they're more likely to get our attention than if they're just talking about their hottest new product.
Yeah, there's kind of this, I completely agree. There's kind of this like unspoken thing in journalism where if a lower level, I don't even like to use that term, lower level employee, but basically someone who's not super high up the org chart, right? If they want to talk to you, that's the kind of conversation you're probably having, not with PR around, and that PR is not pitching you on, because that person actually wants to, pull back the curtain a little bit and shed light on something that's going on inside the company they think would be interesting to you as a reporter. Whereas at the public relations level, if there's someone if someone from within a company is pitching you on, like, I think you should talk to X, I think it really has to be someone who's like, to what Diane said, the kind of more of a thought leader, or someone who really has ownership over a certain segment of the company, whether it's research or product or marketing or engineering or high level COO, CEO types, in order to sort of like make that really worthwhile.
I mean, I'm interested in things like, I shouldn't say this with competitors in the room, but we're coming up on an anniversary of 2 years of remote. I'm curious about people who came into a senior role completely virtually, and the way the culture has changed is fascinating to me. Like, I just took my 5-year-old nephew to the Rockettes, and everybody took off their masks, and he didn't, because he couldn't imagine a scenario where you're in a room and you don't take off your mask. Like, that's kind of sad and poignant. And you think about how the world's changed. And so I think there's a lot of wacky and strange situations in which we now find ourselves. And I'm very curious about how people are living through this. So it is always, to me, the human being at the center of the story, more than the position they're in obviously is important. But, I'm kind of more interested in what Jack Dorsey did, away from Twitter than at Twitter, from what I can see. So, obviously interested now he's doing blah, but these are the stories that resonate with us more than what somebody does or says they do. It's how they live their life is what makes them interesting. So
I think I very much miss in-person meetings. I think they helped foster some of the best PR relationships I've had. And one random one that I took when I was still living in Chicago was with one of the people that helped make the USB drive. And that led to my first trip to Japan. It was a tour of 4 journalists on an 8-day trip just to go meet startups in Tokyo. So I think it's extremely valuable. And so the pandemic has been pretty awful in that regard. It seems like it's made it a lot more difficult to get in touch with people like me. So I don't know. I miss it.
Yeah, same for me. I enjoy coffee meetings or Zoom. I like to meet PR people. I miss the PR dinners. But at the same time, I want to make sure when we meet for coffee, there's at least some kind of value, or, I want to make the meetings a little more productive than just, catching up. So that's something to keep in mind.
I do think that there are a lot of series we're all interested in. I'm interested in a lot more of these deeper dives. You mentioned crypto, that's a huge one for us. And so I think when we're trying to do some of these multi-point series, often it's a series of videos or, interviews. I think that's when opportunities come up to pitch people specifically, because we're really trying to get the experts on that one. And And so I think I would look at people like Martin Giles, who runs our CIO network. Many of you may be familiar with him, and really sort of look at who's covering these areas, because they're also talking, in addition to a general business audience, to an audience of experts who really deeply care about what's next and where to put their money and how to be thinking about these issues like cybersecurity and such.
Kathleen, one of our board members, Gillian Fisher, has been instrumental in organising today's Media Predicts. So I am going to give a call out to her question, which is for you. How can we advise clients on how to get on your lists, like CEO Next? There's no methodology listed. How can we get line of sight to get clients included?
That's for me.
That's for you.
Okay. I think that I'm always intrigued when somebody wants to be on a CEO Next list. In part, if you're a woman, it's a bit of a Faustian pact to me, because my experience in covering women are like heir apparent. It's like they have a target on their back that gets them kicked off the record, of course. But look, I think that we often will. We definitely take nominations. We just had our 30 under 30 came out today. I think that was close to 20,000 nominations. Some things are really get a lot of nominations. CEO Next, that's a case where we definitely want to be on somebody's, we want to know who's on the radar. In all honesty, the best sources for that are the recruiting firms. So, the ones that go out and recruit for CEO roles really pay close attention to the talent base in Silicon Valley and beyond. And so while I don't mind being pitched, I tend to go to the experts in a lot of these situations and rely on a lot of their due diligence and intelligence to help us with our reporting on that sort of thing. Does that help? I mean, methodology in something like that, it's hard to be precise because you're not measuring them by revenue. You're not measured. The metrics are soft metrics, and sometimes it is the impact that they're having in their field, which can't be measured by the bottom line results.
I think I'm not sure whether you all read it, but The Verge came out with a statement that they were no longer going to take meetings on background. And one of our PR attendees today, Alicia, has asked, what your thoughts are around that, because PR people tend to sort of say, this is off the record, this is on background. Do you think that's going to set a trend and a precedent?
I love on background. I don't know. What do you think, Lauren, Kristen?
Yeah, as someone who used to work for The Verge and still has a fair amount of communication with folks at The Verge, I would say I very much respected them putting that out there and starting the conversation about it. And I think that there are maybe 2 or 3 companies in particular, really big, powerful companies that have come to, and one in particular I can think of, that have come to just assume that we as reporters will accept the laundry with The Verge. Can I do laundry with The Verge? Have come to accept that. There's one company in particular that assumes that reporters are just going to accept on background, that like every call you have is on background. And I don't think that is a good way to operate, because I think, as The Verge illustrated with that, their post is that like there has to be dialogue, right, between the reporter and the company you're covering or the PR person you're talking to. There has to be an exchange where both parties are agreeing to the same terms, and that in many cases that is not happening with some of the more powerful companies in this space, and they are incredibly powerful companies that are affecting like the lives of billions of people with their actions. So and it's our job to hold them accountable. So I think like what they were trying to establish is that those conversations should be happening. There shouldn't be an assumption that just because a company's spokespeople don't typically go on the record doesn't mean they're never going to. And I also think that there is there can be at times if there's a spokesperson or spokespeople who are constantly sort of the conduit for this messaging because they're not willing to put their top executives on the phone or on the Zoom to answer questions. then at some point, like that spokesperson, I think does need to be named, right? They can't continue to be this like nameless, faceless person who's sort of like hiding behind the curtain. And that's not because, as some people have like suggested to me on Twitter, that like we want to dox people in any way whatsoever. Many times they already are public facing spokespeople. And it's not because we're like bitter as reporters that like they make so much more money than we do, right? Like that's
is that one of the arguments
that someone like tweeted that at me at one point, that like we're just like embittered, and I'm like, no, if we really were, we wouldn't do what we do. We do what we do because we love it and we love journalism, right? Like, but I do think there are times when like spokespeople should be named. And so like I tend to agree with that. But to your point, Diane, I also like as a I will say, Dan, like as a product reporter, as someone who reports frequently on like in new innovations, emerging technologies, and that sort of thing, there are times when I still sort of do the background briefing on a new product, right? Because that's going to help me better understand it for the story I'm eventually writing on the record, and so I will still accept background briefings.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of people and this check quotes thing, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to check every single quote you just gave me. Literally at the end of the call, it's like you said, check quotes. To me, it's about trust. And so I've had, a long career, and I think that my general philosophy is nobody should ever be surprised by what they read. So if there's harsh criticism, I will always tell them what it is. But as long as we're all razor focused on who the customer is, which is our reader, our viewer, our listener, then we're all on the same page. And so I think I often find myself having to remind everybody, just let's remember who my customer is here. And I want to make them smarter about what the truth is. And so if you don't trust me, then, I think it has to be a relationship based on the trust that we're doing this for our customer, and always going on background implies a certain lack of trust.
It's kind of fascinating for me to hear about what The Verge put out, and also from you guys, because a lot of what happens at SiliconANGLE, particularly with our broadcast, is we have on so many executives. It's almost like a vanity thing. And so there's not many conversations that are on background. They want to be on the record. They want the media component of it. They want to be on video. And so this is all actually very curious to me. And to your point, Diane, it kind of is about trust, because even if you're doing a prep call ahead of maybe a video interview, you would like to be able to speak on the record, or print what they said on the record. But also, to your other point, it's important for them to not be surprised. And my boss, one of the company co-founders, he's often on these prep calls. And one of the reasons that people come to us is because they'll get that time with him, and he will give them that criticism and that important feedback. And that's actually something that happened a lot for me when I was at Mashable, is a lot of early access to consumer products, and a lot of taking that feedback and changing things before they do make public statements. And so I feel like I'm learning a lot tonight. So.
For me, I think it's again, case by case. Sometimes it really helps to get on background comments from PR people, especially for a little less sensitive stories. For example, if Amazon PR is willing to tell me, Jeff Bezos's latest whereabouts, and tell me he's coming into the office 3 times a week on background, I'm happy to include it in a story. But if it's, a more contentious story about working conditions and they want to correct something on background, we're probably not going to be so accommodating, which is, I guess pretty obvious. But.
So I have to call attention to the elephant in the room, and that is nougat.
The most valuable cat.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I thought he might join at some point. He's like, it's dinner time, lady. What are you doing? Sorry about that.
No, don't be sorry. I was being completely facetious. Okay, so we're going to wrap. Thank you very much. Before we do, if there's any last bits of wisdom that you would be able to share with us as PR people working with you, any insight that you think would be helpful, let's just do a fast round. Let's start with Kristen Nicole.
Oh man, I didn't get time to think about a final nugget. Gosh, a final nugget to my PR homies. I don't know. Like, stay persistent. The storytelling angle helps a lot. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for PR folks. I was pre-med in school and sort of landed in the journalism by way of blogging. And it was because I started out doing this random thing that I like to do, and it got really popular. But it wouldn't have been without some PR folks that it was a no-name blog that was very niche to Chicago, but had some very supportive PR people that fed me so much information, not only the information for the story, but helped me understand the industry, and made some really good friends along the way. So keep it up.
Why don't we go clockwise? Eugene.
Yeah, I mean, same message. I mean, I have a lot of respect for what you do, and I think it's very important for our work. So keep, feel free to reach out to me. Just keep in mind that I'm very Amazon focused. So if there's an story idea, please make it, Amazon relevant, or at least some tangential element to Amazon's business. But yeah, I'm happy to work with you guys.
My clockwise says that it's you, Lauren.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I was waiting for the cue there. Yeah, I would say we're all the professional communicators in the room, right? And particularly like in the tech industry, there are like sort of varying levels of like communication skills going on. And so like our relationship does not have to be adversarial. We can certainly like find ways to effectively communicate, even if we sometimes don't agree on stories, or like a company PR representative is not thrilled about a story that we're working on. There's still ways, I think, to communicate professionally and effectively, and to Diane's point, make sure there are no surprises. Like we take what we do really seriously, and so yeah. And then just to echo what Eugene said, I would say so relationship building is such a huge part of it for me. There are some PR folks who I've been working with now for like a dozen years, some who have actually even become friends, in real life, IRL, as the kids say. And so relationship building is like a huge part of it. But I would say that if you pitch me and say I want to grab coffee because I want to get to know you and build a relationship with you, but also I only represent enterprise cloud companies right now, that's probably not the best time to build that relationship, just because it's, it could just end up being I don't want to say waste of our time, but a kinder version of that. So relationship building, hugely important. Love to meet with people, have coffee whenever we get a chance, but sort of has to be relevant to what we're both working on, in that moment in time. And yeah, I look forward to getting to know some of you hopefully after this.
I guess I go back to what my old boss, Steve Shepard, used to say at Business Week, which is death to the marginal story. And I say that often to people on my team. And I think it's good guidance for all of us, because I think nobody needs more content, which is a weird thing to say in a content business, but I think we need better content. And so people pay a lot of money for intelligence. They don't pay for more content. We pay to get that content out of our inboxes and get rid of the clutter. And so anything that cuts through the clutter to make people smarter about what's really around the corner is interesting. It helps us do our job, and it helps your clients, I think, distinguish, because everybody's trying to make an impact.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. And it's been an absolute pleasure and really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you to our audience for the questions and for listening and participating. Without sort of going on further, I will throw back to Vanessa. Thanks again.
Thanks so much, Caroline. And our thanks to everybody on the panel, especially our media panelists who are here, as well as our chairs. Caroline, thank you, as well as Curtis. I think we see you now.
I'm here. I'm still here. I'm still awake. I'm still alert.
Thank you to our Thee. Thank you to everybody. And oh my gosh, look at all these people who put this thing together. Karen Smythe, you're our producer for Friday Forum. Can you even believe that this happened tonight? And we're relatively
Can we do this
on time?
every week? Let's just get the forum. I just want drag queen bingo every week. I need
Who
that.
doesn't?
My
Drag
goodness.
queens for everything. I'm writing a very uptight blog entry, and I'm going to have to cite the history of drag. It's going to be, and by the way, I've never done drag. The closest I ever got was being Ellen, and I really fought the makeup.
But wait, there's more. So the year is ending. We want to make sure that we thank everybody we possibly can. Karen, do you want to run through everybody we should thank? And then we're also going to talk to you about next year, because we are back.
I'm trying to get
Friday Forum is back. Our scholarship program was announced today. If you didn't see that, we are super excited. Weber Shandwick is going to be with us. They're going to join our growing list of sponsors. Thank you again to my employer, HP, as well as Edelman and Boca Communications, and Bospar as the entertainment sponsors. Oh my gosh, there's so much more that we need to do. And thanks to all of you from all the states that joined us, because PRSA Silicon Valley is a state of mind.
Yes.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.